about them in more detail. So myth number 3, teams that work together harmoniously are better and more productive than teams that don't. So harmoniously meaning they work together well without any kind of conflict. Okay, the 4th myth, like I said, they're related, is diverse teams are more creative and innovative than less diverse teams. So let's delve into it. So we talked about what we meant by team diversity. So an innovative team may include diverse contacts, right? And we've talked about demographics, rank, department, whether or not, what social circles or relationships you have within the organization. We could also talk about resources. We could also talk about people who have diverse mentors and sponsors, right? All of these things. It's possible that an innovative team could benefit from having all of these diverse contacts because diverse teams can have diverse cognitive capabilities, right? So diverse perspectives, diverse ideas, diverse skills, right? And that can be a good thing. That can help us have a more innovative and creative team. But diversity, research has really borne out that diversity is potential, right? So it's having a diverse team with different backgrounds and perspectives, different perspectives on what obstacles you might face, different perspectives on what goals you might want to achieve and how you might go about doing that. That's potential. That's the potential to come up with really high quality decisions, really creative ideas. But it's just potential. And so what we want to focus on is how as leaders we can make sure that we harness the potential to come up with these much more creative ideas, to come up with a really productive team, better decisions, and how can we avoid the pitfalls that might come from having so many different backgrounds and perspectives and potentials for conflict and conflicting ideas and conflicting individuals. So diversity is potential. It has a lot of capabilities and different perspectives that we might use to then come up with a high quality decision, an innovative and creative idea. And there are ways to capitalize on that potential. We've kind of hinted at a few of them. I want to go through some ideas for how we could elicit those diverse perspectives. So one possibility, one reason why a diverse team might not come up with higher quality decisions or more creative ideas is because people aren't willing to speak up, right? So you may have a diverse team, just like any homogenous team or a non-diverse team, that might still not be willing to speak up, not be willing to challenge the leader, might be willing to go along with the first thing that's said, or if you get 2 nods, suddenly everybody's in agreement, right? Those typical team issues when it comes to making good decisions or putting forward your perspective. So there are a couple ways to elicit the perspectives of these diverse team members. The first is dialectical inquiry, and the second is devil's advocacy. Both of these, and we'll talk about what that means, but both of these basically improve your decision making, your team's performance, your creative ideas by getting lots of different points of views. So that's the point of them. So first, devil's advocacy. This means that people have to speak up, right? Many of us anyway, have heard of this idea of being a devil's advocate, playing a devil's advocate, meaning that even if you don't agree with the point that you're about to bring up, here's an alternative position for us to discuss, for us to take into account, right? And so one of the ideas in the debates that we're going to do as a class is you may not necessarily agree with the position that you are arguing for, but you can still, without agreeing with it, play a devil's advocate to the position that you would agree with, right? By coming up with the facts and statistics, what holes could be poked in that argument, right? So if, for example, you're in a boardroom or you're at the decision-making table, there is an idea that you agree with, it would be important still to think about what alternative facts there might be. What facts there might be that could poke holes in the decision that you've already made, the plan that you've got, right? The goals that you want to achieve and how you want to achieve them. So this requires that people speak up, they come up with critiques, alternative possibilities for whatever's being discussed, be it a goal or how to accomplish it, or a product, right? And by speaking up and playing devil's advocate, or having someone play devil's advocate, a group play devil's advocate, you can then improve the decision by finding those holes, those problems with your decision-making processes or your product, and improving it to overcome those, right, as best you can. So there's some ideas, a couple ideas that organizations have done. First, sometimes people will assign a devil's advocate or a critic in a group. This can be rotated, or you can always have the same person play it. The devil's advocate, you may find that certain people emerge, who tend to play this role, tend to critique, tend to poke holes in things, and you can encourage that. You may also bring somebody into the group who tends to play that role, right? They may not be on the team now, but you've noticed that they tend to critique ideas or come up with alternatives that could be better, right? And so you may bring those people in. Alternatively, something that 3M has done that I think is pretty brilliant is they will have employees create proposals, and then they'll assign a committee to play devil's advocate. So the employees will present it, their proposals to the committee, and the committee will play devil's advocate against the proposals. So this is an example. You can come up with your own innovative ways to make this something that takes place in your team. So it can be a habit or a process that is involved in the team. So that's one way that you as a leader can encourage dissent and bring out those different perspectives, because any team is going to have diverse capabilities and perspectives in some respect, even a team that seems very similar. The other is dialectical inquiry, probably one that you're less likely to have heard of. So this requires different groups to come up with proposals and plans for handling a problem. So they break off basically and come up with plans separately. The other possibilities, it doesn't have to be two groups. There are some organizations who will choose seemingly similar or homogenous groups. So they'll have like everybody from marketing or from some rank in marketing come up with a project, or a proposal. Everybody in manufacturing on the front lines come up with a proposal. And they'll choose all these different groups that are quite similar in some way, have them come up with proposals. Or you can just have, kind of groups that you've developed in some other way, come up with these proposals, and then they present them. So the idea is that you get these groups that represent all the different stakeholders, all the different viewpoints, all the different departments. So you have these groups come up with proposals. They then present them, and then each group is assigned to then come up with the pros and cons for their own group, and then they debate them, kind of similar to what we'll be doing in class. So we've created a culture where people like each other, they accept each other, they're open to these brainstorming of ideas, they're open to the brainstorming of critiques for their ideas. We come up with, then we need consensus for the actual idea, right? From all these people with different perspectives, create consensus. We need a shared commitment to actually implementing the idea, because it's useless to have a great idea that we can't get anybody on board to implement. And then we need members to like and accept one another enough to work together to actually implement the idea. So not only agree to it and be committed to it, but then work together to actually implement it. So this is what we need, right? Which can be difficult, and it can be difficult to balance the type of conflict and the type of acceptance that we need from an innovative and a creative team. So the distinction here, the key is really the different types of conflict. One is good, one is bad, and let's go through that a little bit. Also note that this will be on your exam. So cognitive or task-focused conflict is really good. So it's that kind of conflict where we focus on creating the best goal for the team, or we have a goal, but we're focused on and have lots of different perspectives on creating the best way to achieve that goal. So if we've all agreed that we want to reduce pollution from people driving cars, right? We've all agreed to it, we've committed to it, that's our goal of our task force. then we have lots of different perspectives on the group because we chose a diverse group to be on the team who has lots of different ideas and comes from different backgrounds and sees different obstacles to potential ways to do that. We want everybody to focus and have conflict in terms of how we accomplish that goal. We want all the conflict within the group, all of the dissent, all of the discussion to be focused on how do we accomplish this? And we hear lots of different perspectives, different opinions on how we can do it best, what we should be focused on, what obstacles there are to people's ideas. Yeah, that's great in practice, but there's no way that's going to work for these different groups and for these different reasons, right? That kind of conflict is very good, especially for coming up with a very creative idea or an innovative product, right? Functional conflict is bad. So what we don't want is people, affect is how much you like somebody, right? How you feel about them, right? That's affect. Relational, meaning relationships between people. So we don't want conflict focused on the relationships between people. We don't want Liam to poke a hole in my idea and for me to be like, what a jerk. He clearly is coming right after me. He always disagrees with my opinion. What is his problem? That's not good. But I want it to accept it. I want to have a good relationship with him. I want to have positive affect. I want to have some kind of liking and positive relationship with him so I can hear him and say, you're right. I mean, I don't totally agree, but I can see maybe we can do this. Maybe we can make this better, right? So you need the group, the conflict to be focused on the task and not for people to take it personally, not for it to impact your relationships. That's the big key here. So we want the conflict focused on the task. We don't want the conflict focused on the people, the relationships, the affect between the people, right? That's a bad thing. Because we need people who like each other enough to actually agree with the final decision and agree and work together to implement it. And so there, in the two steps of this innovation process, cognitive conflict is beneficial in different ways. So relational conflict is bad, period, right? Because that's people taking things personally, getting offended, then you're unwilling to work together, you dislike somebody in the group, suddenly everything they say is personal and a personal affront to you, right? These sorts of dynamics are really bad and can spiral in a team. So relational conflict is always bad. Task conflict is good, but only at certain stages and to a certain extent. So the way you can read this is basically, the bottom line is the amount of task conflict, and the top line is the amount of team creativity, right? Which is that first step of the innovation process where we come up with a creative and novel idea that we then need to implement. So there's a peak at which a certain amount, right? A moderate amount of task-focused conflict is good. So if we don't have a lot of task-focused conflict, if we don't hear many dissenting opinions, we're going to have really low creativity. Our group is not going to come up with very creative ideas because we've not heard lots of different opinions, we've not heard those dissenting opinions, holes poked in it, alternatives, right? And so we're going to come up with kind of a less creative idea. As we get more and more conflict focused on the task, focused on how we're going to achieve our goals, focused on what possibilities are good and what problems and obstacles we might face, we come up with more and more creative ideas. But there's a peak here, right? These are the most creative teams, but if we get too much task-focused conflict, if it really gets out of hand, that can be a bad thing, right? So you want a good amount of task-focused conflict. Too little is bad, but too much is also bad. When you're coming up with a creative idea that you're then going to have to take to implement. But when we look at implementation, the implementation phase, right, which is here in the dotted line, we look at the implementation phase, task-focused conflict is generally not a good idea. It's not very beneficial. And the reason is because now we've come up with the first phase, the early phase, where we come up with the creative idea. We want a good amount of conflict and dissenting opinions and holes poked in our ideas to come up with a pretty creative idea. Not too much, but we do want a good amount. Then we've come up with this creative idea. Now that we're trying to implement it, even task-focused conflict is not generally a good thing. So we still want to minimize. We've come up with this idea, we're all on board, let's do it. I think Liam mentioned this earlier, right? We've come up with an idea, let's just do it. I don't want a lot of conflict in this stage where we're actually trying to implement. Some is not necessarily a bad thing because there may be, small things that you need to still decide and debate about now that you've come up with your idea and you're trying to implement it. But for the most part, you want to minimize it at this phase. So kind of wrapping things up, diverse teams, diversity along all these different characteristics, right, are a good thing. They provide potential for high quality, innovative, creative ideas that you can implement. But it's just potential, and it's you as a leader who have to make sure that you capitalize on that potential. So all those dissenting opinions also have the potential to go terribly awry, with everybody taking these different perspectives very personally, a lot of relational and affective conflict coming up. No one can agree on an idea, nobody can implement it, right? That's not what you want. What you want is to be able to make a culture and an environment and processes that encourage people to dissent, because we want that when we're trying to come up with an idea, to poke holes, maybe through devil's advocacy, maybe through dialectical inquiry, maybe through some other means. We want people to dissent. We want to poke holes in our potential ideas to come up with the best quality decision, but we want to minimize the amount of conflict that people are taking personally, the conflict within the relationships, the conflict within the affect between people. Then, once we've come up with an idea, we may have small disagreements, small task-focused disagreements, but generally we want to have agreed to that idea and work together, to like each other enough to work together to implement it. So relational focused conflict about each other is always a bad thing. We want to minimize it. Conflict based on the task or how we achieve it can be a really good thing, although we don't want too much when we're coming up with an idea, but it's generally not very beneficial when we're actually trying to implement it. And it's your job, so the costs and benefits of a diverse team are not inevitable, and it's your job as a leader to make sure that you capitalize on the benefits and avoid the pitfalls of a diverse team, right? Okay? And here's kind of a general term for what you might want. And so bringing out the best in your people, which is an article, talks about emphasizing a culture in which people feel comfortable contributing ideas, criticisms, and concerns in discussion. So those different perspectives, right? But what we want is to create a culture that's psychologically safe. And we'll talk about this a little bit more later in the semester when we do another simulation. We'll see that that'll play a big part in how well you do. But psychological safety is just generally the belief that people can speak up and their different opinions will be respected, they'll be accepted and respected, right? And so I hope that you feel that way about this class, and that's something that you should strive to create a culture of in your teams.